There's a lot of talk around forgiveness. I don't want to get caught up into the you need to forgive lingo. This class particularly is just for those who are either on the fence or maybe they want to hear a little bit more about forgiveness. Again, this class is a very broad overview on forgiveness. I'm not going to go into anything necessarily specifically. It's just I'm going to touch a lot of different topics. All right, now in terms of defining forgiveness, I personally believe that it's best to define it yourself. After all, forgiveness is a gift to yourself, so you should define it for yourself. Just like we all have love languages, we all have an apology language, we should all have our own forgiveness language. So you need to define what forgiveness means to you. Some define forgiveness as simply letting go. And while that's fine, if you want to define forgiveness as letting go, try to be more specific. How would you go about letting go? Define that. What are the steps? Because it's very easy to throw around these terms, let go, well, what does that mean? Let's get to the core of this work. All right, so I want to break this class down into a couple things. A look at forgiveness after cheating or adultery. Now, this class I'm gonna, like I said, is broad. Gonna break it down. If you are working on rebuilding, great. If you're not working on rebuilding, great. If you hate your ex, great. If you are madly in love with your ex, great. You apply this class as you see fit. Here's a quote by Marianne Williamson. It's forgiveness is not always easy at times. It feels more painful than the wound we suffered. To forgive the one that inflicted the injury. And yet there's no peace without forgiveness. Again, that's Marianne Williamson. So the first step in repairing a relationship after a betrayal is to decide forgiveness is going to be your goal. It doesn't have to be a goal tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. But if the ultimate goal is to reconcile, then forgiveness should be a goal that you're working on. Again, it's like being engaged. Just because you're engaged to be married doesn't mean you're getting married next year. You can be engaged and get married in 2 weeks. You can be engaged and get married in 22 years. So building devotion back into a damaged relationship involves being continually willing to value your partner and being vigilant to avoid devaluing your partner. So there's no way you can work on forgiveness if you want to reconcile, if you're always concentrating, focus, and thinking about how your partner brought disgusting value to your relationship. You're going to have to reframe your mindset, which is a lot of what forgiveness is anyways. Forgiveness in marriage and relationships. Forgiveness looks different when we forgive a stranger versus a loved one, and it depends on the relationship, obviously. There's an old saying, those who hurt me the most was never done by a stranger. So forgiveness can be very challenging. The closer the person is to us, the more challenging it is to forgive because we allow people to get close to our hearts. And the closer people are to our hearts, the more challenging it is to forgive them when they've made a decision to break our heart. Many researchers and clinicians claim that forgiveness is a cornerstone of a successful relationship, if not with the offending party, but with yourself. Conflict and social harm can take a considerable toll on our psychological and physical well-being, and some argue that happiness depends to a large extent on how we respond and remove ourselves from these difficult and painful situations. We can remove ourselves from these painful situations by letting go, aka forgiveness. Now, keep in mind, forgiveness is not a one and done. It's not a one and done. It's not like you have your bachelor's degree, so nobody's ever going to take it away from you. Life can take away forgiveness. So you may have heard this before. We have to often forgive the fact and then the impact. So it's not a one and done. You have to oftentimes continually forgive. There is a word, and I know I'm going to butcher this. It's a Greek word. I think it's makrothumio. It's Greek, and basically the literal meaning is to have patience with me, give me time. And that's a quote on forgiveness. So basically what it is I'm learning to deal with you. Please be patient with me and give me time. That's forgiveness, according to this Greek philosopher. The ability to forgive and seek forgiveness significantly contributes to a relationship satisfaction, is often raised as one of the most important factors that affect relationship longevity. I always say, especially I'm a wedding officiant, so if I'm like doing premarital coaching with couples, I'll always say, you got to get up every morning and pre-forgive. What does that mean? You have to tell yourself, there's going to be a good chance my partner offends me today, uh, intentionally or unintentionally. I want to go into this day already forgiving them for what potentially they could do. Now, obviously, that's easier said than done, especially if they make an egregious uh, mistake, decision, whatever you want to call affairs or cheating. But for the little things, because obviously it's the little things usually that affect relationships. It's not necessarily the boulder that prevents us from climbing the mountain. It's the pebble in our shoe. Um, so forgiveness has been hypothesized as being related to some important relationship skills. So, for example, people who forgive might readily have a greater number of general coping repertoires for handling stressful situations in life. People that forgive are have more robust coping strategies. People that forgive have a tendency to be less likely to offend their partner, especially with retaliation. Retaliatory affairs are very common, fortunately, and all they do is hurt the relationship, hurt both parties, but that's a whole other class. Those who don't forgive have a less capacity to commit to a relationship and are less willing to make sacrifices for a relationship. I mean, obviously, and it's common sense. We're hurt, so we could become bitter or angry or resentful, and that makes us less willing to make sacrifices in a relationship. And if you're rebuilding, you got to make sacrifices in a relationship, as unfair and unjust as it is. I read a study that also talked about how gender played a role in forgiveness. There's several actually studies that suggest women are more forgiving than men. I the studies that I read did not go into the reasons. I'm sure it's some social construct of what's put on little boys relative to what's put on little girls, or maybe the expectation put on little girls. I don't know. The studies didn't necessarily go into that. I have my own theories, but you're not here for theories. Without forgiveness, transgressions, especially if they're significant enough to disrupt a relationship, they elicit strong negative feelings. And these fester, which is why I say forgiveness is not a one and done. You got to really continually forgive, because if not, emotions and feelings and thoughts and anger can fester, which turns to hostility and disdain and contempt and all this other stuff, and even retaliatory behavior. When we bring these tendencies into close relationships, it can take on some interesting variations when we consider, like I just said, retaliatory tendencies that often come with non-forgiveness. Um, Another quote I just want to mention is, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. One longitudinal study that I read charted the fights and the instances of forgiveness on a weekly basis in couples for 9 weeks. So they studied like couples for 9 weeks. And the study showed that in close relationships, we are inevitably engaged in a certain amount of conflict over time. I don't care if it's with your child, your spouse, your creator, your parent, your coworker. You're in a relationship with somebody, there's going to be conflict. But couples who reported forgiving after the conflict were happier 9 weeks later than those who didn't forgive. So think about it. We jeopardize our own happiness when we don't forgive. Forgiveness does not mean having tea on Tuesdays with the person. It just means whatever your definition is, releasing, letting go, giving it to God, whatever your definition is. I'm going to give you another quote from Bernard Meltzer, which is, when you forgive, you in no way change the past, but you sure do change the future. All right, forgiveness in families. Children learn forgiveness behavior at home as it's modeled for them by their parents. Friends and family members also take notice of how we forgive, and that motivates the forgiveness trend. Especially because we live in a world, Lord have mercy, we live in a world of, man, you do this, you're a dog, and I will walk away and not look back and spit in your face, and you don't deserve my forgiveness. And that's the wrong attitude, because forgiveness is not for anybody else but yourself. It's to give yourself internal peace. Um, we do not have to reconcile. Forgiveness does not mean reconcile. Forgiveness does not mean reconcile. Forgiveness and reconciliation are two completely different and separate worlds. Reconciliation involves a decision and the cooperation of another person. People decide whether they're going to reconcile, how they're going to reconcile, the protocol around reconciliation. So unlike forgiveness, reconciliation requires cooperation of both parties and rules and responsibilities of both parties. Forgiveness just requires one party. You don't ever have to see that person again to forgive them, or you could make them breakfast and be in love with them tomorrow and forgive. I mean, but reconciliation and forgiveness are two separate things. Another quote I just want to drop is mistakes are always forgivable if one has the courage to admit them. Now, I like this quote. It's actually by Bruce Lee, but I'm going to tell you something, and I've learned this the hard way. The hardest apologies to forgive are the ones that you never received. There are people that are watching this and that are going to watch this that have gotten majorly screwed over, and their partner, significant other, spouse, ex-spouse is moved on and is with somebody else or doing someone else or whatever the case is. And oftentimes, even if there's narcissistic, tendencies, are blaming you or something, and so you're never going to get that apology. So one of the hardest apologies to forgive is the one never asked for. This is why it's important to understand this is not about anybody else. If you get an apology, wonderful. That's great. I hate to say this, but you don't need one. You don't need anyone's validation. You don't need anyone's acknowledgement. You don't need anyone's anything. You can do all this on your own. Now, if somebody's trying to be a decent human being, it would be great if they gave you that. But this is a gift you give yourself, regardless of what anybody else gives you. Forgiveness is about the person doing the forgiveness. Forgiveness within yourself allows for reconciliation within yourself, which enables forgiveness towards others and can lead to reconciliation if reconciliation is the goal. But if reconciliation with somebody else is not the goal, then reconciliation with yourself, such as becoming the person you were before trust was broken. Obviously, I don't mean that blind person. What I mean was that unblemished person, that unjaded person. Because what happens, and Lord knows I get it, it's very normal, it's very common. We get very jaded in life, but I always say if a professional cook gets burned by the oven, of course he or she can say, I'm never cooking again. That is your right. Don't forgive. Do not forgive if you don't want to. That's your right. But think of all the beautiful, delicious dishes that would never be made if that cook didn't decide, I'm going to cook again. I'm going to bake again. So I don't want you to block your blessings. That's what it comes down to. Another quote is, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and to discover that that prisoner was you. That's by Lewis Smedes, or Smedes. All right. The ability to apologize and empathize has been found to be a good predictor of individual forgiveness. Commitment, closeness, and fewer tendencies to exhibit negative emotional reactions to life stressors is easier with people that forgive. And again, you have to define forgiveness yourself. What does forgiveness? Everybody has their own love language. Everybody has their own apology language. Everybody has their own attachment styles. Everybody has their saboteurs, what sabotages us in life. Everybody has their own definition of forgiveness. You have to decide what forgiveness means to you. Then apply it to yourself first. I forgive myself for believing every time my mother told me I was worthless. I forgive myself for, my father believing my father didn't love me because he never spent time with me. Whatever you need to forgive yourself. I forgive myself for being blind to my spouse's infidelity or whatever. Forgive yourself, then apply it to others around you. If not, you just make your world smaller. That's not fair to you at all. The last quote I'm going to leave you with is there's no love without forgiveness, and there's no forgiveness without love. That's by Ryan McGill. So again, this wasn't a class on, you must forgive, you need to forgive, whatever. It's if you do decide that forgiveness is for you or other people, these are some hopefully valuable things to think about. So I hope you got something out of this. And I know forgiveness is a tough one, but try to reframe what forgiveness means, and that might help you on your forgiveness journey.